Welcome to the Lion's Share podcast, where we break down today's most impactful research and bring fresh insights from the academic frontier straight to you.
Okay, so picture this. It's late afternoon, January 29, 2009. We're in Basel, Switzerland. It's deep winter, it's freezing cold, and Franz, who's the chairman of the pharma titan Roche, is standing in his office, just looking out at the Rhine River.
It sounds pretty picturesque, but behind the scenes, it was a moment of absolute corporate crisis.
Exactly. Because, while the view was calm, the global financial world was basically burning down. Lehman Brothers had collapsed just a few months before.
Right.
The credit markets, which are pretty much the plumbing of the whole economy, were frozen solid. And in the middle of all this chaos, Humer's trying to pull off this massive $44 billion deal to acquire a company that, he arguably already owns.
And that's really the central paradox we're unpacking today. We're doing a deep dive into the HBS case study, Roche's acquisition of Genentech. And this isn't just a story about a merger. It's a collision of corporate strategy, valuation mechanics, and some really high-stakes governance, all playing out during, the worst recession of our lifetimes.
And the company in question is Genentech. They're the cool, science-first biotech pioneer out of San Francisco. And Roche, the sort of buttoned-up Swiss giant, already owns about 56% of them, but they want the rest.
They want that remaining 44%.
Mm-hmm.
And the numbers here are key. Roche offers $89 a share. Genentech's special committee comes back and says, absolutely not. We're worth $112.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here, that gap, that $23 difference per share, that adds up to about $10 billion in total value.
$10 billion. That is a massive chasm to bridge, especially when, like you said, the banks have pretty much stopped lending money.
So our mission today is to treat this business case as a piece of academic research. We're going to analyze the question of value, the methods the bankers used to calculate it, and then the conclusions the leadership had to draw from that.
Which is really the only way to understand what happened. Because at its core, this whole story is about agency theory, valuation methodology, and really the subjective nature of truth in financial modeling.
Okay, so before we jump into our 6 structured questions, let's do phase 1, the setup. I mentioned Roche already owned a majority of Genentech, 56%. Since 1990, they'd had this unique arrangement, right? The rich uncle model. How did that work exactly?
It was a fascinating structure, almost unique in corporate history. Roche provided the funding, the deep pockets, but they let Genentech operate almost completely independently out in California. Roche basically said, here's the money, you go be the nimble innovator, don't worry about Swiss corporate bureaucracy.
So Genentech got to keep its hoodies and the work hard, play hard culture, while Roche just paid the bills.
Essentially, yes. And for a long time, it worked beautifully. Genentech produced these blockbuster cancer drugs like Avastin and Herceptin. Their stock price went up tenfold between 1998 and 2008.
So what changed? Why break up what sounds like a happy marriage?
Well, there were 2 main drivers. First, efficiency. Roche looked at the books and saw about $750 to $850 million a year in what they called synergies.
Which is just corporate speak for duplication.
Exactly. 2 HR departments, 2 manufacturing chains, 2 sales forces. Roche was arguing, we're paying double for infrastructure we only need once.
And the second factor,
the opt-in rights. And this is crucial for the valuation fight later. There was a contract expiration looming in 2015. So basically, Roche had the right to commercialize Genentech's products outside the U.S. That deal was set to expire.
And if it expired,
Genentech could technically take their pipeline and sell those rights to the highest bidder, maybe a competitor like Pfizer or Novartis.
So Roche was looking at a ticking clock. They couldn't risk losing control. So July 21st, 2008, Roche makes its move. They offer $89 a share.
Which at the time was a nice premium. It was well above the trading price. But then, like you said in the intro, the world just fell apart.
Right. And this is the part that seems so counterintuitive. Roche offers $89. The market crashes. You would think Genentech shareholders would be thrilled to get that price when their stock is trading in the low 80s. But they come back months later and demand $112.
It seems irrational on the surface. But this brings us to the managerial framing of it all. We have to look at this through the lens of governance in minority squeeze-outs.
Okay, that brings us to our key terms. For our listeners who might not be M&A lawyers, let's just clarify a few key concepts. First, what exactly is a minority squeeze-out?
It's the legal mechanism where a controlling shareholder buys out the remaining minority. But here's the catch. Because Roche controls Genentech, they have a fiduciary duty to those minority shareholders. They can't just bully them into a deal. They have to prove the process is completely fair.
Which explains the special committee.
Exactly. To avoid getting sued for breach of fiduciary duty, Genentech forms a special committee of independent directors. These are people with no ties to Roche. Their job is to simulate an arm's-length transaction. They hire their own bankers, Goldman Sachs, and their own lawyers.
So they're basically creating a simulated negotiation to protect themselves from liability?
Simulated is a polite word, but yes. Which leads to the second key concept, asset destruction. Genentech's value wasn't just in patents, it was in its culture.
The people.
The people. If Roche comes in with a hostile takeover, what we call a tender offer, and just bypasses the board, those scientists might see it as an act of war.
And if the scientists walk out the door, the value of the company just evaporates.
Correct. The third term we need to lock in is DCF, or discounted cash flow. This is the main valuation method here. To put it simply, it's about translating future hopes into today's dollars. But as we're about to see, tiny changes in the assumptions, like the discount rate or the tax rate, can swing the value by billions.
Okay, we have the context, we have the terms. Now let's structure this with our 6 specific questions. Question number 1. What is the research question of this case, and why is it so important?
The central research question here is, what is the standalone intrinsic value of Genentech, and how does the current market crisis affect that calculation?
Why that distinction, intrinsic value? Why not just look at the stock ticker?
Because the Genentech Special Committee argued that the stock ticker was broken. I mean, in January 2009, the market was panic selling everything. Genentech was trading around $82. But the committee's argument was that that price reflected fear and a liquidity crisis, not the long-term value of their cancer drugs.
So the importance here is really about a massive transfer of wealth.
Billions of dollars of it. If Roche pays the market price, they are, potentially stealing the company at a recession discount. But if they pay the intrinsic value Genentech claims, they might be overpaying by 30%, which would destroy value for their own shareholders.
All right, let's move to question 2. What theories do the authors and the protagonists in the case rely on to develop their hypotheses?
I see 3 main theoretical frameworks at play here. First, obviously, is valuation theory. The fundamental idea that a company's value is the present value of its future free cash flows. That sounds simple, but projecting future cash flows is an art, not a science, especially in biotech where one clinical trial can change absolutely everything.
Okay, and the second theory?
Agency theory. This is the big one. Agency theory deals with conflicts of interest. Roche appoints Genentech's directors. But now those same directors have to negotiate against Roche.
That sounds like an impossible position to be in.
It is. The special committee is the theoretical solution to this agency problem. It's an attempt to create independence where, structurally, none really exists.
And the third?
Strategic management theory, specifically vertical integration. Roche wants to move from just a holding company model to a fully integrated company. The theory says this should capture all the cash flow and remove all the friction costs of having 2 separate entities.
Okay, let's get into the detective work. Question 3. How does the research design address validity? And by design, I mean the competing financial models that the 2 sides were using.
Right, and this is where it starts to get suspicious. We have 2 competing studies of value. We have the June LRP, the long-range plan, and then we have the November NFM, the new financial model.
Let's break those down. What was the June LRP?
The June LRP was the standard budget. It was approved by the entire board, including the Roche directors, back in early 2008. It was business as usual. Roche's bankers, Greenhill, used this approved plan to come up with their $89 offer.
And the November NFM.
This is where we run into major internal validity issues. The NFM was created after Roche made their offer. It was created by Genentech management specifically for the special committee to justify a much higher price.
That sounds convenient.
An academic would call it endogeneity or bias. The November model assumed, significantly higher revenue, lower taxes, and lower capital expenditures than the plan they had all approved just a few months earlier.
Wait, hold on. So the economy crashes in September, the world is ending, and in November, Genentech says, actually, we're going to be much more profitable than we thought.
Exactly. It raises serious questions of non-random assignment. The projections weren't neutral. Roche relied on the old, conservative numbers. Genentech created new, optimistic numbers. It looks like a classic case of goal-seeking. They knew they wanted a price over 100, so they tweaked the inputs to get there.
And what about external validity in all this?
That's the market context. The stock market was screaming that the company was worth maybe $80, but the special committee just argued that the external validity of the market price was zero because the market was dysfunctional.
It's a bold move to tell a buyer, ignore the stock price, ignore the recession, just look at this spreadsheet we made yesterday.
A very bold move, but necessary if you want to get $112 a share.
So let's look at the actual math. Question 4. What econometric methods are employed here?
Well, both sides used a DCF discounted cash flow analysis. But the inputs were just radically different. Roche's bank, Greenhill, used a WACC-weighted average cost of capital of 9%. They assumed a terminal growth rate of 2%.
Explain the terminal growth rate really quickly.
Sure. In a DCF, you project cash flow for a set period, say 10 years.
Yeah.
But the company lasts forever, right? So you have to estimate how much it grows after year 10. That's the terminal growth rate. A small change there compounds into billions of dollars. 2% is a pretty standard conservative number, usually tracking with inflation.
So Roche used standard inputs.
Yeah.
And that got them what price?
A value range of roughly $74 to $81 per share. So in their view, their $89 offer was actually extremely generous.
Now, what did Goldman Sachs do for Genentech to get all the way up to 112?
They got very creative. They didn't just run a standard DCF. They added this massive adjustment. They slapped on an extra $8.2 billion in value for the 2015 opt-in rights expiration.
$8.2 billion was added on top.
Yes. Their argument was that in 2015, Genentech would be free to sell its products to anyone, not just Roche, and that freedom had immense value. They also lowered the assumed tax rate from 35% to about 30%, and they extended the forecast period all the way out to 2024 to capture more high-growth years.
Those are huge levers to pull. I mean, lowering the tax rate by 5% alone is massive for a valuation.
Huge. And they addressed the weakness of all this uncertainty by running sensitivity analyses, creating ranges. But the problem was the two banks' ranges barely overlapped. Roche's ceiling was basically Genentech's floor.
Which brings us to question 5. What are the major results, and do they actually answer the research question?
Well, the result is a stalemate, a gap of $23 per share. But digging into the data, the results show us exactly where the disagreement is. It's not just the financial model, it's the assumptions about the science.
You mean the Avastin trials?
Right. Avastin was their wonder drug. Genentech's model assumed really high success rates for new clinical trials for adjuvant colon cancer. Roche was much more skeptical. If those trials succeed, the stock skyrockets. If they fail, it drops. So the research question of value couldn't be answered because it depended on clinical trial data that simply didn't exist yet.
There's also a result here about cash, right? Genentech had, what, $9.5 billion just sitting on its balance sheet?
A massive cash trap, and Roche couldn't touch it. If Genentech paid a dividend, it would be taxed. If they loaned it to Roche, it's a conflict of interest. The only way to unlock that $9.5 billion was to merge. So that cash was effectively held hostage until a deal closed.
Okay, finally, question 6. What conclusions do the leaders make, and are they warranted given the theory, the design, and the econometrics?
Roche concluded that the special committee was being unreasonable, that they were just playing games to stall. They believed the NFM, that November model, was a biased document invented purely for the negotiation.
And Genentech's conclusion?
They concluded Roche was trying to exploit the crisis. They felt the $89 offer just ignored the massive potential of their pipeline and the fact that they'd beaten the odds so many times before.
So are these conclusions warranted?
It's nuanced. From your perspective, you have to admit Genentech has a point. Their track record with Herceptin and Avastin was stellar. Why wouldn't they beat the odds again? They were the best in the world at what they did.
But looking at it more skeptically.
The NFM looks very suspicious. I mean, changing the tax rate and CapEx so drastically in 5 months suggests they were reverse engineering a valuation. It's very hard to justify those numbers with the data they had in June. It suggests the special committee was acting less like a judge and more like a defense attorney.
So what conclusion does Franz reach back in his office? He's got this decision matrix with 3 really bad options.
Option 1, fold. Just pay the $112.
Too expensive. He'd be overpaying by billions, and his own shareholders would revolt.
Option 2. Wait. Hope the Avastin trial data in April comes back negative, which would lower the price.
That seems incredibly risky. If the data is good, the price could go up to $130, and he loses his chance forever.
Exactly. Which leaves option 3. The tender offer. Go directly to the shareholders at a lower price, say 89 or maybe a bit higher, and bypass the board entirely.
Colossal move.
It is. And it carries that marketing risk we talked about. If you go hostile, you risk alienating the employees. The source material mentions Humor worrying specifically about the impact on morale and the ability to hire. If the scientists leave, he's just bought an empty shell.
But his patience was running out. And we haven't talked enough about the credit markets. How did financing factor into his conclusion?
It was the ultimate constraint. In January 2009, getting a $40 billion bridge loan was nearly impossible. Roche's CFO had to go directly to bond investors because the banks were paralyzed. If Humor launches a tender offer, he needs that cash in hand. It was a high-wire act with absolutely no safety net.
Let's zoom out to wrap this up. This deep dive isn't just about 2009. How does this paper connect to broader themes in the literature?
The broader M&A literature suggests that cash-rich companies should buy during recessions. Prices are low, competitors are weak. Roche was doing exactly what the textbook says to do. But the textbook doesn't account for the financing channels freezing up completely. It shows that macroeconomics can just completely override microeconomic strategy.
It also raises the question of how you value culture. We talk about it like it's soft stuff, but here, culture was a line item worth billions of dollars.
Absolutely. The threat of destroying the Genentech culture was the main leverage Genentech had, which leads to a practitioner takeaway. If you're a manager looking at an acquisition, you have to ask, is the target's value in its assets, its patents and factories, or in its people? If it's the people, a hostile takeover is a very dangerous tool.
What about the special committee? Based on this case, are they actually independent?
That's the cynical but necessary question. Agency theory says they should be. But in practice, they're often incentivized to posture. By rejecting the first offer, they prove they're doing their job. If they said yes immediately, they'd be sued for not fighting hard enough. So this whole dance of rejection and counteroffer is almost structurally required.
It's theater, very expensive theater.
Expensive, but legally necessary.
I want to go back to that opt-in, right, for 2015. It just seems like such a specific detail to swing a deal by $8 billion.
It shows the power of contracts and valuation. That one clause created a strategic cliff for Roche. If they didn't do the deal, they faced a potential disaster in 2015. Genentech knew that. They knew Roche was desperate to secure those long-term rights. That leverage is probably why they felt so confident asking for 112, even when the market was saying 80.
So Humor is sitting there. He knows the NFN is probably padded. He knows the market has crashed. But he also knows he needs those rights, and he needs those scientists.
And he knows that if he waits and the economy recovers, the price will never be this low again.
Talk about pressure.
That's why CEOs get paid the big bucks, right?
Okay, let's leave our listener with a final thought to chew on.
Here's what strikes me. The source material mentions that many Genentech employees didn't even know Roche owned 56% of them. They thought they were working for this independent, scrappy underdog.
That is fascinating.
It implies that independence is sometimes just an illusion maintained by a corporate structure. If Roche wins this battle and buys 100%, that illusion dies instantly. So the question is full ownership worth the loss of that identity? Does knowing you're owned by big Swiss pharma change how hard you work to cure cancer?
A fascinating question of psychology versus finance.
Precisely.
That's a wrap for this deep dive into Roche and Genentech. We'll catch you on the next one.
Thanks for tuning into the Lion's Share podcast. If you enjoyed today's discussion, share it with a friend and join us next time for more ideas worth talking about. We'll see you next time.